Welcome to the Thanatonic Phenomenon, a video series dedicated to developing a phenomenological approach to the concept of evil. In the last video, I presented different ways of interpreting the effect of a painting. Many of those interpretations draw from a particular metaphysical framework that defines the nature of reality and truth. Today, we'll discuss the nature of this metaphysical framework. If you enjoy this video, please like it and consider subscribing to my channel. To consider a phenomenology of Givenness requires understanding its relation to a historically situated conception of metaphysics, defined as a project of grounding and certainty. Grounding involves establishing an Archimedean point for reason and knowledge. Certainty is an epistemic property that justifies this grounding. A possible way of thinking about this modern variant of metaphysics is how the possibility of knowledge determines the principles of reality rather than the principles of reality determining the possibility of knowledge. In other words, before asking what is it, we now first ask what justifies our knowledge of it. Examples of this grounded certainty range from the Cartesian cogito to Rawls's original position and veil of ignorance. Even empiricists who prioritize a posteriori knowledge presuppose particular a priori concepts concerning the nature of sense data and consciousness, which Hume's skepticism brought to light in raising the problem of induction. At other times, this grounded certainty has been expressed through fundamental axiomatic principles or laws of thought. Leibniz identified two that provided the necessary and sufficient conditions for every truth claim. First, the principle of non-contradiction declares that opposing statements cannot be both true at the same time and in the same way. This applies to necessary truth. For example, a circle cannot both be round and square. Second, Leibniz's modern formulation of the principle of sufficient reason establishes that for a thing to exist, happen, or be true, there must be an explanation, as only nothing can come from nothing. For necessary truth, the principle of non-contradiction is its sufficient reason. Contingent truth, that is, truth that could have been false, is also subject to the principle of sufficient reason, though it cannot often, if ever, be demonstrated in practice, and as such requires appeal to some transcendent principle like a god that has comprehensive access to such reasons. Schopenhauer elaborated on the principle of sufficient reason, proposing four classes: external causality that explains changes perceived in natural objects, reason that explains the use of concepts for making judgments, time and space that provide the basis for arithmetic and geometry, and the internal causality of motives that explains action. Presenting Schopenhauer's elaboration demonstrates the scope of this principle, which, as can be seen, goes well beyond the justification of theoretical concepts, being applicable to all forms of knowledge, including that of the natural and social sciences. To violate these principles would entail producing a paradox. The question pertinent to a phenomenology of Givenness is whether paradox should be understood as mere contradiction or whether some paradoxes are only apparent contradictions from within a particular system of thought. The latter sense would point toward a definition of paradox based in its etymological root as being contrary, para, to belief or expectation, doxa. The historical search for grounded certainty produced a seismic shift in the epistemological status of subject and object, leading to an inversion in the relationship between the act and actor of knowing and the object of knowledge. Aristotelian philosophy, which preceded this modern project, placed the gravity of knowledge upon objects in their distinct essences. Consequently, the knower had to be properly disposed to the object to acquire knowledge from it, much like artisans must conform to the demands of their material before them. The project of a grounded certainty instead requires that objects conform to preceding conditions to be intuited by a clear and attentive mind. By placing the conditions of knowledge in the subject rather than the object, a universal science becomes possible, one that can now ground all knowledge upon an indubitable foundation. This shift is radicalized with Kant, who limited knowledge to the phenomenal and grounded it in the necessary and universal a priori conditions of possibility for experience found in the mind. Those conditions are situated first within the intuition of sensibility and the cognitive faculties of the understanding. Sensibility provides the conditions of space and time that permits the appearance of objects in intuition. The understanding deploys concepts for making judgments about those intuited objects. These categorical judgments are organized into four classes: quantity, quality, relation, and modality. Quantity deploys the concept of extensive magnitudes, numbers, while quality deploys the concept of intensive magnitudes, or degrees. Relation allows for the possibility of temporal experience by representing the object's unchanging features, changing features, and concurrent interaction with other objects. Finally, modality concerns the ontological status of an object as to whether it exists or not, and if it does exist, whether that existence is necessary or possible. These conditions establish a grounded certainty concerning not only the possibilities of experience, but also their limits, as nothing that enters intuition can appear to us without a concept applied to it. Two corollaries follow from this. First, the fundamental features of objects are established. They must satisfy the conditions that guarantee their certainty. Consequently, the unknowable thing in itself of the noumenal world must pass through and be regulated by the filter of necessary and universal conditions of possibility. Quantity limits the object to a finite set of parts that can be aggregated or divided. Quality fixes the object to the measurement of its expected intensities. Relation demands the object be reducible to its causes and thus reproducible. Finally, modality requires the object be possible according to these conditions of knowledge. This leads to the second corollary, that the object, for it to appear under all of these conditions set forth by the understanding, must undergo a final condition, the synthesis of apperception by a unified consciousness. This transcendental ego, for Kant, is not to be confused with empirical conceptions of consciousness. It possesses no qualities, and nothing can be said of it beyond its unifying function. It cannot be an object of knowledge, as it is the fundamental condition for all knowledge. It is a pure act that makes knowledge possible. These conditions are not important merely for theoretical and mathematical concepts. They are constitutive of the empirical sciences, economies, and technological advances. For instance, a scientific object, or what is called a variable, must be operationalized for it to be a possible object of study. The operational definition ensures the variable is distinct, observable, and measurable, and thus can be reduced to and represented as some form of data. The simultaneous and sequential measurement of multiple variables allows the scientist to draw correlational or causational relationships, ultimately in the service of prediction and control. This analysis is not intended to call into question the legitimacy or genuine benefit of these enterprises. The difficulty here does not reside at the level of praxis, but instead with the metaphysical framework directing these fields of inquiry. Rather than allowing for only a regional applicability to matters of knowledge and experience, this framework of grounded certainty assumes the mantle of universal science that defines possibility and truth. The question then is not whether we should or even can do without objects. Instead, it concerns the possibility of thinking outside or alongside of this metaphysical project. Of course, if metaphysics defines possibility, questioning it and offering exceptions to it would entail providing a possibility that surpasses the possible, thus producing paradoxes. Can paradoxes be a legitimate source of philosophical reflection, or have we just ventured into the absurd? A phenomenology of Givenness is proposed to open to that alternative, and so we next turn to it to consider and evaluate the legitimacy and success of this possibility beyond possibility. Thank you for watching. Feel free to leave a comment or a question below, and I'll see you next time.